Is it on? Is that better? All right, there being a quorum present and a microphone working, we will call this meeting to order. If you would please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to take a minute at the opening of this meeting so we can honor a member of us who's no longer with us. Poor Virginia Mooney had passed away since the last town meeting. So I believe Sherry is going to say a few kind words about Virginia.
Is going on stage left, 15 is going on stage right. Is it on yet?
Try this one.
That was better? Thank you. All right. I, Shari Ellis, request that the town meeting vote the following resolution. Whereas the town of Burlington has lost a valued member with the death of Virginia Mooney, we wish to recognize and honor her for her years of service as one of the original representative town meeting members and her 27 years of service to this body, as well as her 3 years as a select woman and many other years of service on the many boards in the town of Burlington. On behalf of its members, we vote this resolution the 28th day of September in recognition of the achievements of Virginia and gratefully acknowledge her many contributions to this town.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you, Sherry. You know, I thought we were going to have another loss to talk about, but the selectmen just told me they just had a special meeting, and they've extended Mr. Petrin's contract, so he's not leaving. He's not going anywhere. Tonight is John's last meeting with us. You can see the tears streaming from his eyes. You know, I think I first met John at a Ways and Means meeting. I think that was a rude awakening to what he had to deal with town meeting, and I'm not sure he ever quite got over it, but he managed to get through it as need be, and we got most of the work done, didn't we, John? Thank you for your efforts. I think you've left us in a better position than you found us in, so Godspeed and enjoy your retirement. We have a new member to introduce ourselves. If you'd be so kind as to stand and give us your name and precinct.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tamara Maniscalco. I'm from Precinct 4, and I just came down tonight because I was interested in serving as a town meeting member, and since no one else was here to oppose me, I'm a town meeting member for the evening, so I'm glad to be here. I'll just tell you a little more about myself. I've been living in the town for 15 years. I have 2 children. They go to Marshall Simons and to Francis Wyman, and I work outside the home as a software development person, and I also do account management. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. I'd like to make a note that our state rep, Ken Gordon, is here. Thank you, Ken. I think undoubtedly Ken has better attendance here than some members, so it's much appreciated. Well, what else do we have to take care of? Article, what is it, 4? Has been withdrawn, so that's one off of our list. Okay, the moderator would entertain a motion to allow us to vote by raising our hands. Is there a second? All in favor? All opposed? The motion carries. I'll do that for that special one. The moderator would also consider a motion to name Frank Monaco as deputy moderator for tonight, should one be needed. All in favor? Opposed? He only agreed because he doesn't think one will be needed. Now we have a whole bunch of reports to go through. One from the Scholarship Committee. Sherry, is that you? Oh, Lucy, excuse me. Mrs. Damiani.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lucy Damiani, Precinct 3. I'm representing myself and Sherry Ellis, also of Precinct 3, and coming back to report to you on actions which were taken by this town meeting at our September meeting. You will remember that at that time we had an article before you to reestablish the terms of Chapter 194 of a section of the Mass General Laws, which authorizes a voluntary tax checkoff program in order to establish scholarships for Burlington residents. We are pleased to announce that at its January 14th meeting, the Board of Selectmen appointed a new Town of Burlington Scholarship Fund Committee. The committee is made up of 6 residents and 1 representative from the Superintendent's Office. The members of this non-compensated committee will serve terms of 3 years and are subject to the terms of the open meeting laws and the conflict of interest rules. And all future committee appointments will be made by the Board of Selectmen in public session. The members are Gina Leary, Chair, Rosalind Manisian, Vice Chair, William Bovin, Secretary. He's also a town meeting member from Precinct 1. Thank you, Bill. Jennifer Kosis, Sheila Fitzpatrick, Ken Moffett, and Joe Adubato will represent the Superintendent's Office. He is the BHS School Services Coordinator. We are very, very pleased with the qualifications and enthusiasm presented by these appointees. We thank them in advance for their service. They expect to award their scholarships for the first time this spring. Watch the town website for news of the Burlington Community Scholarship Fund. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Damiani. We also have another new committee per your instructions. We have a sidewalk committee that's been appointed and is up and operating. Chair is Steve Moran. And Steve, if you could say a couple words, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'm Steve Moran. I'm the chairman of the Sidewalk Committee. We were established back in September to take a look at the town policy regarding sidewalks and to come back to the May town meeting this year with our recommendations. On the committee is Christine Warren, Adam Sinesi, Sean Connors, and Mildred Nash. So far, we've been getting ourselves situated with the sidewalk policies in town. We've talked with the town moderator, the town administrator, John Petrin, and Tom Hayes, the DPW town engineer, we've looked at various projects in other towns, like in Billerica in their town center. We spoke with Kristen Kastner in the planning department and learned about the different economic programs. We've met with Christopher Hartling from the Selectman's office, and we've received a bunch of input from some of the town meeting members at some of our meetings. In the next week or so, we'll be sending out a survey to get input from town meeting members as to the various things that they would like to see in terms of sidewalks, so that way we can incorporate that into our planning. We do have some paper copies tonight, but we will be distributing an electronic form in the future. I'll work with Ms. Warfield to get that out. And as always, anyone is welcome to come join us at our meetings. We typically meet every other Monday at 7 o'clock, usually either in Grandview or the Town Hall Annex. Check the calendar for where we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Another new committee is yet to be heard from. Zoning Bylaw Review Committee. Sherry Ellis, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I just want to take a brief minute to introduce the members of the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, and I have my list so I don't forget anybody. Myself, I am the chair. Betsy Hughes from Precinct 7 is the vice chair, and we have Kathy Byer from Precinct 2, Tom Conley from Precinct 4, Larry Gelberg from Precinct 6. No, he was Precinct 5. Sorry, Ed Parsons from Precinct 6 and Greg Ryan from Precinct 1. We also have members that were appointed from the administration, Ernie Cavino of the Planning Board, Mike Murray from the Zoning Board of Appeals, John Clancy from the Planning Department, from the Building Department, excuse me, and Andy, who will be taking over for John once he retires. And also we have a business community representative, Sally Willard. So this body, town meeting, approved the formation of the committee last January. And following the appointments of the moderator, we met for the first time in October. We've had 4 very productive meetings. Our mission statement summarizes how we're going to approach the task of fulfilling our charter. Our mission statement is that the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee is going to ensure the town's zoning bylaws are current, clear, concise, and they conform with the Burlington Master Plan and the Mass General laws. The first few meetings, as I said, they were pretty productive. We've engaged in formal discussions with the Planning Department, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Building Department to better understand how each of those departments utilize and apply our zoning bylaws. From the discussions, the committee identified the initial list of the zoning issues that we're going to address, the stakeholders that are involved, and how we're going to prioritize the actions going forward. And finally, working with the Planning Department and the Planning Board on the Life Science Zoning Amendment that you're going to vote on tonight, Article 2. We worked with them and I think had a good relationship there. So looking forward to working together with all the relevant town boards to review and where needed propose bylaw updates for coming back to you for town meeting approval in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Sherry. I believe the schools had something they wanted to say. Dr. Conti?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. There was a handout in the back of the room. I just wanted to make sure I drew some attention to it. Working backwards, on one side of the document was our budget calendar, so working back from our April 3rd presentation to the full Ways and Means Committee. We've identified the various school committee meetings where different parts of the school budget will be presented in detail to the school committee. So that's part of your budget document. I also just wanted to briefly go through some bullets on the other side of the page in that since this summer, some of the updates in the business office, and I certainly want to recognize the efforts of Nicole Kasha, our business manager. She's been managing our 19 budget and implementing lots of change in the office, so Nicole, thank you. Again, school committees adopted all new policies. There's a website where you can review those policies. They're receiving monthly financial statements, and that's getting budget updates, budget to actual, and projected budget, so that's all happening currently. The school committee is also receiving monthly reports on the revolving account balances. Business Office is in the process of implementing their electronic purchase order system, and that will allow for moving away from paper. It'll allow for real-time and better controls. The student activity accounts, the procedures are all in place. And so all of the former accounts have been closed, new accounts have been opened and are being they are being managed under the new procedures, and student activity accounts are being audited annually internally and every 3 years externally. The Business Office has implemented a real-time personnel change procedure, which really, again, helps us. The majority of our spending is on personnel, so as people come and go, that is being tracked real-time and connected to the budget in real-time. And then we have 2 letters of engagement that are presently in process with Powers & Sullivan, and that's a review of our primary revolving accounts, and also we're having a mid-19 audit ahead of the full-year audit. So Powers & Sullivan were actually in the office today, so that process is undergoing. So we've made some significant changes from the fall, and again, the budget calendar is presented to you, and again, this information will also be posted on the website. So thank you, Mr. Moderator, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Conti. Ways and Means. Mr. Riggs.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So the Ways and Means Committee is beginning the new budget year. So we have a schedule provided by the Accountant's Office of the dates on which all the departments will be reviewed, starting with the meeting in beginning of February on the 5th. The school subcommittee has done an awesome job of and a thorough job of digging through the questions around the financial investigation, and they have sent around a report which everybody should have received by email, and is posted on the Ways and Means website. I very much appreciate the efforts of the school subcommittee, Sue Harrigan, Diane Creedon, John Eiler, Nick Priest, and Yashri Ferrante. And just to give a little more summary on the report, I'd like John Eiler, through the moderator, to give a summary.
Mr. Eiler.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So as Mr. Riggs described, the school subcommittee has been working on a financial investigation to look into the FY18 $700,000 deficit, which was just 1.2% of the budget that we discussed back at September town meeting. The report has been completed. As mentioned, it's been emailed to all town meeting members. It's also on the Ways and Means page of the town website, so the entire town can take a look at it there. I'm just going to do a quick rundown of the major sections of the report. It is a bit lengthy. This may give you a little guidance as to what's going on in that report. So the scope section is describing what we pay attention to. Again, it was focused on the FY18 operating budget deficit and the late discovery thereof. We also looked into the FY18 and 19 budget creation and operating procedures. Should highlight that this specifically wasn't an audit in the accounting sense of the term, so it wasn't our goal to validate the numbers per se. We're leaving that up to the auditors, the town auditors take care of that each year. The procedure section describes what we did. The process began back in September and finished up just in January here. We create a list of questions to get to the heart of the matter. We worked with the school administration over the course of over 15 different meetings with the subcommittee, with the school committee, with Ways and Means. A lot of email back and forth, getting responses to all of these questions, coming up with new issues as we discovered things going along. The results section describes objectively most of the data that we received from both the town and school administration, so folks can look at that data and analyze it all they want. And in the course of this whole investigation, in obtaining this data, both the administration and the school committee were extremely helpful and very cooperative in obtaining all this data and working through the questions with us. So you'll see in there a breakdown of the deficit, explaining the various components of it. There's also a description of processes used both in FY18 and FY19 in how the budget was developed and the operating procedures of the school administration. You'll see in the results section links on the town website to get to both the school policies, the financial policies in particular, and also a list of all the school-related contracts. If you want to drill down on the details, they're all in there. The following section is the discussion section. This is the subjective evaluation of all the results in the previous section. In there, you'll see a discussion of all the various numbers and tables that appeared in the results. In general, the numbers all add up. They make sense. And it's really the process issues is perhaps some of the more interesting discussion. So in particular, you'll see a number of issues were highlighted there. There had originally been a paper-based purchase order system, and that led to a number of difficulties, and in particular, oftentimes, or sometimes, the purchase orders were not showing up at the budget office until the invoice was there to be paid, which obviously makes it very difficult to track expenses. As highlighted before, there was an issue that the previous budget manager had retired, and there was no overlap with the new one, so a lot of institutional knowledge of what was going to happen during the year was lost, unfortunately, and that's why things were a little more surprising than they had been in the past. And you'll see a discussion of the budget process, how some of the numbers appear to have unfortunately just been repeated from previous years, and some of the deficits were a result of that. And probably the biggest thing was the lack of a monthly financial report. Because of the PO system, the data was not there to create a report because the expenses that had been incurred were not in the budget office, so therefore an accurate forecast couldn't be done. And this certainly was one of the key things at the heart of why the problem was discovered very late in the year, in fact, after the end of the fiscal year. So the next section is the recommendations section. And some of these recommendations are things that the school administration was planning to do and are repeated in there just for emphasis. Others are additional ways and means recommendations. So again, the single most important recommendation is probably the monthly financial reporting, which Dr. Connie mentioned has been underway since October. And we just, at the most recent school committee meeting, had the January report. On that monthly report, there's data with the revolving accounts, and then for both the accommodated and regular operating budget, there's the budget, the actual expenses, and forecasted expenses for the rest of the year. So one can quickly see, based on the data that's in the system, if there's going to be a deficit coming up somewhere where that would have been a surprise in the past. And it becomes visible much more quickly this way. I'd like to emphasize that the monthly reporting is something that should happen forever. So even if things are going very smoothly, the way you make sure that those things continue going smoothly is keep that visibility there, keep it visible on a monthly basis, so that if things do start going the wrong way, you'll know quickly. We've also made fairly lengthy recommendations on updating the fiscal policies, and as Dr. Connie mentioned, some of that work was done back in the fall, and it's just had a first reading for some of the remaining policies at the most recent meeting, so that is close to wrapping up. Obviously, the budget manager, should they retire again, we'd like to see some overlap with the new one. One of the things we'd like to recommend for future budget work is that historical data for at least the past couple of years be shown for the key budget items so that we can sanity check that the budget going forward is one that makes sense and at least has some basis in previous experience. The transition from the paper-based PO system to the Munis electronic system is obviously key to automating the process and keeping, helps electronically enforce the fact that POs must be approved before spending can occur. And the budget office, because it's in the system, will see them instantly. And finally, there's a financial analyst position that's open, and we wholeheartedly support having that be filled to help the burden on Ms. Kasha in particular. So in conclusion, the investigation, I would say, did not generate any big surprises. The numbers, the sources of those numbers, the procedural issues are all very similar to what we described back in September in our presentation then, or our discussion back then. And similarly, the recommendations are largely in line with what we recommended back in September, and it's good to see that a lot of those are either done or underway right now. So I'd like to encourage everyone, especially those of you that signed a petition, to have an investigation. Take the time to read the report. It is somewhat lengthy, it's 14 pages, but all the data's in there. People can decide if the conclusions are warranted or not. We obviously think they are. But now's the time. If you ask for an investigation, go take a look at it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eiler. We can take a couple questions if there are any at the moment. Mr. Stam.
Are we requiring, Steve Stam, Precinct 4, sorry. Are we requiring contracts or contractors to report expended amounts in addition to what they've actually billed, to know what they've expended and when they've expended it as a forecast of what the billing will be?
Mr. Eiler?
I would suggest the school administration should probably respond to that.
Well, if we're going to get into details, I guess we don't have that answer at the moment. So let's just move on. Sorry, Mr. Stam, you'll have to ask Ways and Means at their meeting. I'm sure they'll get you an answer on that. Any other questions? Seeing none, I guess we'll move along. I think that gets us through Article 1, reports of committees. Is there anybody I missed? Mr. Petrin, Selectmen have something to say?
Yes, Mr. Moderator, thank you. And it must be your, you forgot the request from earlier. First of all, thank you. I'd like to first congratulate Paul Sagarino on his appointment as your next town administrator here in the town of Burlington. You all know Paul. He's been with the town, 12 years now, as assistant town administrator, town accountant. And he'll do a great job. Hopefully he can continue my tradition of kabuki theater, song and dance, and smoke and mirrors here has been highlighted at one point. I also like to introduce John Denizio. John is the new assistant town administrator, town accountant. John brings an extensive background to the position, and he's going to do a great job for us. Chairman Riggs outlined that we do have, again, guidelines for this upcoming fiscal 20 budget that everybody's operating under. That's been approved by Ways and Means, Selectmen, and School Committee, so everybody's having budget hearings and preparing for May town meeting, which I am enjoying this process greatly. I want to just report on two projects. One is the fire station project. It is moving along very well. It is on time and on budget at this point, so it is expected to be completed by May 1st and hopefully open by June 1st is what we're looking at. And the second project that's in its early stages is Public Works. We were working on that. We've got the committee working on that, and we are reviewing various aspects. So we had told town meeting at one point we're going to try to keep the two buildings that were present, work around those two buildings, but code compliance, it looks like we may not be able to work around at least one of those buildings because of new codes, and the cost would be greater to try to upgrade that building. So we're working on those issues, and we'll be reporting back, or someone will be reporting back in May as to what occurs. So the projects are going great now. If anything goes wrong, I will be blamed for anything in the future, so just to give you notice on that. And I also just want to congratulate, he's not able to be here tonight, but John Clancy. John, our building inspector, is retiring February 8th. So I just want to commend him for his 32 years of service to the town of Burlington. He's done a great job for this town. And certainly wish him well in his retirement. And again, as I have always done, I need to thank the department heads and the employees of this town. We have a lot of people who do great work in this town. We have a great crew. I've been in other communities. I understand the value of the people we have working for us, and they should be valued here. Again, they do a great job for you. So again, my commendations to our department heads and to their employees for the work that they do. Thank you.
Any other committees who wanted to say something? Good. Okay, on to Article 2. Article 2 is not as is written in the warrant, and since it's 4 pages long, the moderator would consider a motion to waive the reading. All in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Hopefully, everybody picked up or got a copy that has red line on it, has some red printing. Most of the red type on that indicates the differences between the warrant or the motion as we're voting and what was printed in the warrant. So. But what we are voting on is this motion, this 4-page motion for the life science amendment. Now we will turn it over to the planning folks. Kristen? Ms. Kastner?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I wasn't sure if you wanted to start with the committee votes before I got into the presentation.
You may go ahead and present them.
Okay.
I don't have them, so I know you told them to me, but I didn't write them down.
Well, thank you. Actually, before I start, I did want to echo what John Petron had mentioned about John Clancy, and we've worked with John for the 17 years I've been here. The first year I got here, Tony Fields went on paternity leave right after I started, and we had Leahy right in front of us with a 330 square foot expansion. And had it not been Andy and John right there at that point getting through that hearing process and review, and I think the planning board members can attest the hundreds of people in July of that year, and some of you that were planning board members at the time remember. Anyway, from the beginning there and throughout the entire time that I've been there and my staff, I think John has been integral to the development of this town, overseeing the development, and I think he'll certainly be missed by our staff, and I think our board as well. So just wanted to say that first. And with that, I will, I guess, report the votes. The planning board voted 7-0-0 in support of the Article 2, the Life Science Amendment. We also went to the Board of Health. The Board of Health voted 5-0-0 in support of the amendment. The Board of Selectmen voted at their meeting 5-0-0 as well. And just this evening, the Zoning Bylaw Review voted 8-0-0. And I'm sure you'll hear a report from that committee as we continue. So to start, we had a fantastic forum on January 16th in the town hall hearing. We had town hall hearing room. We had members. We had Dr. Weiner from the Board of Health. We had a member of this body, Dr. Parsons, on the panel, which was fantastic. We also had two other industry professionals. Dr. Jared O'Clair from Northeastern. He's pretty much in charge of all of the safety reviews of all laboratory spaces within Northeastern, both Burlington and in Boston, as well as Daniel St. Clair, who has been a professional kind of in the market of life science space and in the, kind of the market demands that life science and lab have as they look for location and make locational decisions. So we had 50 in the room. So far, as of last week, we had 201 views on Facebook Live, which is fantastic and probably the most viewership I've had for a lot of things. So I hope many of you tuned in. If you weren't in attendance, I saw a lot of you there at the panel itself. And some of the things that came up in comments is just what I wrote here, is that this is the tip of the iceberg of this discussion. And this is really the first step in a bigger discussion about life science. And kind of the meaning of life science in the Commonwealth as well as here in Burlington. The second that kind of goes into that is it's the beginning of a much bigger conversation to continue. And there was also some suggestion that this body, from a member of this body, that maybe we can consider a Burlington Life Science Council to continue that discussion in a more formal way. And I know the Board of Health has commented that the Planning Board and Board of Health should work together a little bit more as we continue to look at life science companies coming into Burlington. So today, Massachusetts is the epicenter in the world for the life science industry. And that is because it's due to the proximity to institutions, Harvard, MIT, and others. It's top National Institute of Health funded hospitals, research center, and a strong labor market. So if you can't read the slide, so Greater Boston is #1, San Francisco, San Diego, Raleigh-Durham, Philadelphia, Maryland, Seattle, New Jersey, Los Angeles, with Minneapolis, Houston, and Long Island at the end. But we go, I mean, if you look at, it's the weighted score, and this was from a market report forecasting the end of 2018, forecasting for 19. But you can see that there's, on a lot of measures, the weighted score for Boston is very high. Just another piece, there's a lot of money. There's billions of dollars coming into Massachusetts from the National Institute of Health. In Massachusetts alone, we have $2.7 billion coming in from the National Institute of Health, with the largest per capita funding in the country. The second piece, the venture capital, all of people giving all the capital to start all these new companies that are going to become bigger companies, is at about $3.5 billion, considering biotech as well as all the other life sciences. So there's a lot of money in life science coming into Massachusetts. U.S. employment, there's 1.73 million jobs in the U.S. with 85,000 companies. In 2000 alone, there was 264,000 job postings, and the forecast is that this industry is going to grow almost double to other industries between now and 2026. In Massachusetts alone, there's almost 70,000 employees in life sciences. Average wages are about $150,000, which adds to a $10.4 billion in wages for the life science industry. Right now, as many of you know, Kendall Square is the hub of life science with 130 life science companies. It has the densest concentration of life science companies in the world. From MassBio, a report they just put out, that there is life outside Kendall Square. Kendall Square is getting expensive and it's getting full. As you're hearing, there's move into Boston, but there's also move out to the suburbs. Cambridge, Boston, Worcester, Waltham, Lexington, Woburn, Watertown, Bedford, Marlborough, Barica. There was just a company that just moved to Norwood, of all places. So where are we on this list? which is the question and why we're starting here and why we're putting this amendment before you. So as mentioned, they're moving out Worcester, Northwest, Boston, Cambridge, South Coast. So what does life science, what do the spaces look like? What are they looking for in location decisions? With Kendall Square and Boston having low vacancies, an increased need for lower cost space is fueling the suburban migration. We're definitely seeing it in our neighbors, Bedford, Lexington, Waltham. Bedford and Lexington and Billerica, they all use Burlington in their marketing campaign. That isn't it so awesome that you're next to Burlington? But isn't it so not awesome if they drive through Burlington every day to go to a different town to get this, to a different building and that they get all the tax revenue? Outside of Cambridge, rents are 40 to 45% cheaper. But buildings that have been rented and converted to laboratory life science space and our new construction is increasing in rent about 15 to 20% over a 1-year period, which is a huge increase. And life science industry is high value buildings, which is increased tax revenue for Burlington. So one of the things and one of the reasons for the amendments that I'll get to, the Mass Biotech Council ranks communities in bio-ready rankings. If you can see, and if I can get this correct. So if you see, bio-ready rankings, platinum, gold, silver, bronze. Burlington is right here, this diamond shape we all know and love. We are surrounded, for the most part, by very dark blue shapes. And many of these dark blue shapes are what the communities that you saw in the listings previously. And what the difference between bronze, silver, gold, platinum is allowing biotech and life science by right somewhere, as well as having pre-permitted buildings for the industry, which we do have, but we don't have them by right somewhere. So, and I'll get to that when I talk about the warrant. So location decisions, again, challenge to attract and retain top talent by meeting the needs of both millennial employees as well as growing families. At the panel discussion, we had a couple comments which talked a little bit about, you have all these millennials in Kendall Square, but you also have PhDs that have kids and have cars, and do they need to go into Kendall Square every day? And really kind of matching that talent pool. And Burlington, and what they're looking for, amenity-rich environments, proximity to research institutions, proximity to hospitals, and then the last one is accessibility. So we have amenities, we are proximate to research institutions, we are proximate to hospitals, and we are accessible. So why aren't we, and we do have life science companies here. I will say though, when we approved the Millipore coming to Burlington, we kind of looked at it a couple years ago that Millipore was going to be like Sun, where in the early 90s we did a lot of work to try to figure out what's the next industry. It was software technologies and other computer device technologies, and Sun came in, and then Oracle came in, and then Nokia was here, and it really, that strategic decision at a certain point to create the Sun Microsystems Plan Development District to allow and highlight certain industries changed the course from the early 90s through the mid-2000s. The mid-2000s, we looked at all right, we have a lot of office, we have a lot of space, we don't have any amenities in that mid-2000s, and through this body, we made a lot of changes to really get that engine going and increase the amenities and diversity of spaces. So as we've kind of been working on kind of a 10-year cycle between the 80s, the 90s, 2000s, we're at the 11th year. We've built out Northwest Park, we've built out the district, and it's really what's next and what should we be aware of? And when Millipore came in, and we're not seeing a lot of interest. So what is it about our regulations that may need to be looked at? And that's how we ended up here. So the changes that you will see in the warrant are actually fairly small but really meaningful in terms of what we're trying to get at. We define life science using more current language, so when people are looking for, can I do this new technology? I'm not a life science professional, so excuse me if any of you are, and you could speak a lot more clearly than I can. But using more current language than the 1977, 1980 language. We also clarify use categories to get at life science. We merged it with biotechnology, as life science is a biotechnology is a life science. To just be clear that it's not just biotechnology we're looking for all of life science. And we also created dimensional criteria more analogous to the density impacts, where you have a traditional office and you have X amount of people per square foot. When you have a either mixed office lab space or just lab space, you have 50% or less people per square foot. So therefore you have less trips, less need for parking. So you'll see that with the dimensional criteria for parking as well as floor area ratio. So what will this do? This will, and we also allowed for life science as a yes in the IH district. The IH district currently only is the Burlington Marriott, the Hilton Garden, and one building within the Oracle campus. So we don't have a lot of IH property, but by allowing it in that district, we do elevate our bioreadiness rating. By defining life science in our bylaw, we create a search word for those companies in Germany who want to locate life science in Burlington. It comes up. And we also are allowing for dimensional criteria that allows for the space to be constructed and renovated to meet the needs of the life science industry. So those are the key changes. And the last thing I want to say is that life science is currently allowed in Burlington. It's just, and this doesn't allow something that isn't allowed now. It just allows for clarity as well as better criteria to meet the needs that the industry has. So that is my presentation, and I have a wonderful group here. I have Dr. Weiner from the Board of Health and the Planning Board. If you have any other questions for the board, Dr. Weiner or myself. Thank you very much.
Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I don't have an official report. As I stated before, we worked closely with the planning department and the planning board. Felt like we had really good conversations back and forth. We support the amendment and voted 8-0-0 in favor.
Thank you. That will open up questions from the body. Seeing none. Oops, there we go. Mr. Frost?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Matt Frost, Precinct 3. For Ms. Kastner, in your presentation, we're not even a silver rated environment for life sciences?
No, we're rated as bronze.
Bronze. So will this enable us to become platinum?
This will enable us to become gold for sure if we take some additional actions in listing some of our sites on the Biotech Council site lists. Those type of things will bring us to platinum, but we can't get to platinum until we're at least gold. So this will bring us to gold. And the only regulatory changes needed to be able to elevate is the one that's in front of you.
And what feedback are you using to make those judgments that if this gets passed, we'll go from bronze to gold?
Excuse me. There's defined criteria within the Biotech Council Biotech Readiness Rankings criteria that would allow us to go from bronze to gold. And we've also had conversations with folks at the Biotech Council about the elevating the status.
Thank you.
Mr. Webb? Excuse me, yes, Mr. Webb. Woods? Webb. You know, two W's and you sit beside each other.
Mark, we're in the same district.
Sorry, Mark.
It's okay. Mark Woods, Precinct 7. Just a question on the, I guess, edits. Could someone tell me what a biosafety level 4 is that's been scratched from the wording? It sounds scary.
I will respond to the amendment. If you have questions about biosafety level 4 itself, I think Dr. Weiner would be perfectly suited to answer. But the point, so when we met with bylaw review, zoning bylaw review, they did aptly point out, we had it in the definition. However, biosafety level 4 doesn't describe life science. It's actually more of a use prohibition. So if you look in the use table, it's repeated in the use table instead of in the definition, just as it's a use, not necessarily a definition. So it is scratched out in one place, but it is added to another, so it is effective that it is prohibited in Burlington.
Excuse me. Paul, there you go. Thank you.
No, bio level 4 is the highest level. There are only a few of them in the country. They're where they study things that are dangerous and that are, you know, out of the realm of what most of the research is. I believe they have one at BU, don't they, Ed? Yeah, and it took them like 8 years to get it. So we don't want level 4, we're never gonna have level 4. And so I wouldn't be concerned about that.
You can think of bio level 4 as the types of bacteria that they would use in warfare. Those types of extremely virulent organisms that are not necessarily used in commercial research whatsoever. We would never allow that in this community and put this community at risk.
Mr. Monaco.
Speaking. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Frank Monaco, Precinct 4. What I'd like to know, and I don't know who should answer it, but I have this mental image in my mind, particularly when it's sort of a new movement in an industry. Is it the developer that puts up space that then companies come to it as a movement mechanism, or is it always a company looking to come to the area and then they find a building or ask to have a building built? I'm not sure what will pull more in here. Do we have to outreach to companies or actually to businesses to make the space in Burlington and bring the companies in? Thank you.
Ms. Kastner.
So it's both. And what we discussed at the forum was that speed to market was a really important aspect. And so therefore, I mean, I think life science companies wish that they totally understood construction and the process in which to be permitted or renovated. But I think it's going to be a combination of those that have buildings to market to make those buildings ready to attract life science industries. And when we talked about, that's both renovating existing space and new construction. So I think it's kind of marrying both, and it's not one is more important than the other. It's you need to kind of provide the ability to have the space that the market needs. And whether it's the developers, or I think they'd love to have the companies come and say, I want to be in Burlington, let's figure out how to build this. But I think one of the hurdles has been that our regulations don't quite fit. So then it's quickly to go to, well, Bedford and Billerica's do, so why don't we think about there? So I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in.
I just want to note that in every single case, these companies need a special permit, and they still have to go through the Board of Health for review. Even those 3 buildings, as we have learned, are being used for office space or hotel space. So even if a company wanted to come there, it would be a change of use, and the Board of Health would still have to review any of those companies and their methods before they came to this town.
Ms. Byer.
Kathy Byer, Precinct 2. I have a request. When you came to the Zoning Bylaw Review Committee, you made a comment next to me where you said, you gave us an example of a life sciences company calling you up with a phone call, and you explained why these bylaw changes were necessary. So could you just give us a quick snapshot of you get the call and what happens now compared to what will change?
Sure. So we get the call. Hooray, someone called, because but we get the call, and right now it's trying to find existing space, which we don't have a lot of existing space, that's fit out as a laboratory office use. I mean, Millipore is brand new. They've built out their building to fit their needs. We have talked to some of the property owners in town and developers to potentially convert, although converting is costly. So they want to know that they can, and if they do convert, what are the other regulations that might be an issue? So we've run into issues with. We've run into parking issues where the parking right now for this type of space is the office ratio, which is 2.5 to 3. So, but a life science company, as I mentioned, has a lot less parking, but you need to have that amount of parking. So we've had a few buildings that could have been used for a life science that didn't meet the parking criteria and didn't meet it enough that the planning board can find if they're 10% here and there, but it didn't work. So with that was an issue where we worked through and said, okay, the parking criteria doesn't work. And then when they look to new build, the size of the space that's allowed under the floor area ratio in the IG district is a 0.25, which means if floor area is the total building divided by the total land area. So if you have 100,000 square foot lot, you can build a 25,000 square foot building. And that dimensional criteria was created at a time when we had a different type of office environment, even different than we have now. But it's an office criteria. It's if you have that amount, then you can have this much parking, and that relates to the impact of the use. We're not seeing the same type of impact. So therefore, when you're looking at building a 400 to 800 square foot building, it's not going to be a choice that makes sense in Burlington, where our neighbors are all either above 0.5 or have no floor area ratio at all. So those particular things have kind of handcuffed us in the conversation, where you draw them in and say, yay, it's so great, you want to be here, but we can't make it work. So that's some of the reasons for the changes. So thank you for the question.
Mr. Killelea.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tom Killelea, Ways and Means. I guess maybe the question is for Town Council. What, theoretically, in this possibility, if a company wants to come in with maybe something that's considered a little dangerous, and let's just say that it gets signed off by the planning board, but the Board of Health has questions or does not recommend it, and where does it go from there? Who has the ultimate authority? I mean, we've seen the situation between planning board and the building department, and so it's not something, it's clearly something that could happen. So where would that go? Does anybody, any one of those two boards have ultimate authority over the other, or any situation like that?
Ms. Kastner, can you handle that question? Or do we need town council?
I'm sure council could as well, but I just wanted to highlight, in the regulation, in the use regulation, it says subject to the regulations of the Board of Health. Additionally, regulations in Article 10, Section 1050. 1050 was written specifically to get to that question, and 1050 requires that if the Board of Health does not approve a use for some reason or the other, the planning board can't approve. Okay. So the regulation in the bylaw kind of requires the coordination between the boards.
So that's the fail-safe of the...
That's the fail-safe for the scenario that you
Thank you.
highlighted, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Mr. Stam.
Yes, Steve Stam, Precinct 4. As we found out with the residents in debacle, that it's important that our zoning bylaws be clear and concise. And I had mentioned this the other night with Kristen, but in having words in there that say including but not limited to means you can be almost anything. And so I would strongly object to those words. I mean, I like the bylaw, I like the idea of the bylaw, but those words bother me. And is there anything that planning or bylaw review would be willing to do on that to help me?
Thank you, Mr. Stam. Is there any comment on that? Seeing none, who else has a question? Mr. Moreno.
Thank you, Pat Moreno, Precinct 1. Are we doing anything to advertise our, whatever we do have available, and what are we doing to accommodate those? In other words, are people calling, are people inquiring, and if so, how are we responding? Are we simply inviting them in, or is it just happenstance the way they come in? Are contacts made regularly?
Ms. Kastner, please.
Not enough. As I said, when Millipore came into Burlington, there was, I don't know, I mean, for us, I think there was an expectation that it would be that Millipore being here would be the multiplier effect to bring others. And we've been surprised. And then really looking at that, and that's why we're here. This is the first step in a larger discussion. Should we be doing more outreach? Sure. Should we be doing the fancy brochures like other parts of the state are doing to attract companies out of Kendall Square? Of course. And I hope we do all those things. But you gotta one foot in front of the other. And step one, we're here. I hope all of you feel that you understand the industry a lot more than you did before we started this. And I hope to continue the discussion. But there's definitely more we can do.
Additional questions? Mr. Boschel.
Chair Boschel, Precinct 4. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Quick question with regards to biosafety levels. This was one of the things that I noted as well, so I think it's a good idea to definitely prohibit BSL-4 across the board. This still permits BSL-3, which includes yellow fever, SARS, TBC, and all the other kind of fun stuff. So is there any kind of consideration for special permitting for any kind of BSL laboratory, because they do pose risk to the community? Thank you.
Ms. Kastner.
I actually will defer to Dr. Weiner. I think he did a fantastic job addressing this question at the forum on the 16th about BioLife Science, as well as highlighting all the regulations that the Board of Health has to discuss the different biosafety levels, as well as any other issues that may come up.
Dr. Weiner, please.
Thank you very much. Biotechnology or life sciences, there are 6 federal regulatory authorities, including the EPA, OSHA, DEA, U.S. Health and Human Services. There are 4 state agencies, including the Department of Public Health, Departments of Fire Science, Public Safety, Emergency Response Commission, and there are many local departments, including MWRA and most of all the Board of Health. This town has a lot of regulations and has a lot of fail-safes. For instance, this board alone has an impact, a historical impact on all of these companies. You put an environmental engineer 40 years ago into the Board of Health. This individual, this professional, will inspect all of these companies. And when I say companies, they do any company that generates hazardous materials. We have in town 14 companies that do life sciences, and we have 3 companies that do rDNA work. We have an rDNA regulation where they have to come before us. They have to show us what they're going to be doing. We have an individual, one lay individual, as well as our environmental engineer that sits on their safety board. And we review every life science company through special permit that comes into town. So there are lots of fail-safe to regulate these institutions. And just think, these are not the companies post-World War II who came into this community and really impacted it with pollution, impacted it with contamination. We are now cleaning this town up. Hopefully, I have said this many times, hopefully in my lifetime, this town will be totally clean, and we have cleaned up all the contamination from the historic work. These are companies which use tiny amounts of chemicals. These companies are safe. Of the 14, which include Leahy Clinic, Millipore, Abbott, I could go on and on, multinational companies which work here every day, and we have never had an issue with any one of them. I hope that helps.
Go ahead.
Appreciate that, Dr. Weiner. Just back to my question, is like I do believe we do not have a biosafety level 3 lab in town, is that correct?
No, we do not.
Right. So it's like, I just want to I understand that we have a lot of good and sensible regulations in place to protect ourselves, and so far I've been in a position where this generally very clean science or very clean industry has been helping us across the board. I just want to make sure I understand, if somebody came to us and said like, hey, we got this great idea, we want to do like a yellow fever research laboratory in town, do we feel that we have, with the kind of regulations we have in place, enough control over what's going on there? Because any kind of outbreak from a laboratory like that, any industrial accident or so, can actually spill out quite easily into the community, and it doesn't really matter whether it's just a couple of viruses. As soon as you have a sufficient viral load or bacterial load, this can directly affect us in pretty significant kind of ways. Again, we don't have level 4, so we're not dealing Ebola or similar kind of viruses. But it's like even dealing with something like yellow fever or SARS or et cetera is definitely concerning and would have potentially, if it came to an industrial accident, impact on the local community. So I just want to understand that you feel and that the board across the board feels sufficiently informed and sufficiently protected against that. And one question around that is also, is like, are we making sure that the fire department is appropriately equipped to handle kind of outbreaks along those lines? And that's it. Thanks.
Well, let me take the last question first. Our fire department works closely with our environmental engineer to understand and to know exactly what's going on in this town. We work very closely with them. We have the chief and the assistant chief here tonight, and I'm sure that they'll tell you how close we work with them. As far as the community being contaminated, we are reviewing everything around the process and the building that does come to us. You mentioned SARS. We had a SARS case, one of the few in the country here, and the boy in a nursery school, in a daycare center, and we handled it. And they were within that type of an institution. They had no fail-safe or anything to be regulated. We have a hospital in this town, which I'm sure sees many of the diseases that you just mentioned. But I got to tell you, this is a clean industry, an industry that they don't want to expose not only to the public, but themselves either. They don't want to be exposed to these. So as far as I can say, anything could happen. Anything could happen anywhere with the, but I can tell you that we work very closely with these companies, as with all of the other agencies which I mentioned, to ensure safety.
Thank you, Dr. Weiner. Mr. Boyven.
Moderator. I'm Bill Boyven, Precinct 1. I'd just like to support what Dr. Weiner just said. I spent 27 years in a Food and Drug Administration laboratory in Winchester, Massachusetts, And we dealt with chemicals, living organisms, high voltages, hazardous materials, radioactive materials, all kinds of things that could have, if they escaped from the building, could have hurt the neighboring communities. The oversight and regulations are amazingly strict and seriously enforced. So I never felt unsafe in that environment, and I never felt that the community was unsafe either. So I support this bylaw, zoning bylaw change to better accommodate the life science manufacturing industry. And frankly, I'd rather see something like that come into town with less parking, less traffic, good paying jobs, bringing good real estate tax in, rather than another bank, restaurant, or a high traffic retail business. So thank you.
Mr. Sinesi.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Adam Sinesi, Precinct 1. Please move the question.
The question has been moved. It's not a debatable issue. All those in favor of moving the question? All those opposed? The motion carries. Brings us on to the main motion. All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Well, we need a 2/3. So it either needs to be unanimous or we need to stand and count. So let's try it one more time. All those in favor? All those opposed? There's still one person voting no. That's all. So we'll have to do a count. All those in favor, please stand. Could we get a couple volunteers to count? Oh, he is. New accountant. He's learning one of his new jobs. Okay, thank you. All those opposed? There being 95 in favor and 2 opposed, the motion carries. Remember that when we get to Article 10. Yes, sir. Mr. Glantz.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Lowell Glantz, Precinct 1. Can I make a motion to take that article out of order and do it next so we don't have to do this again by accident?
It's the only 2/3 we need this tonight, Nolan. Thank you. Oh, and besides, it won't take effect until it's approved by the AG. So, nice try. I appreciate it. Okay. Article 3, to fund the Burlington Police Command Officers Contract. It has been moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee to see if the town will vote to transfer from the negotiated settlement account the sum of $375,915 for the purpose of funding the approved collective bargaining agreement between the town of Burlington and the Burlington Police Command Officers Contract for FY 2017, FY 2018, and FY 2019, same to be spent under the appropriate authority or to act in any other manner in relation thereto. Board of Selectmen? Mr. Hartling.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Just to circle back to something you said earlier, thank you for drawing attention to Mr. Petrin and making note that this is his last meeting. He's having his goodbye tour, which a lot of people think started 6 years ago. But seriously, though, it's important that you all know that John has always had a healthy appreciation for and a respect for how important town meeting is in the process. And I think a lot of the department heads would agree that there have been some positive changes as far as how information is disseminated. So just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention if you weren't aware of it already. Regarding the Burlington Police Command Officers contract, the Board of Selectmen voted 4 in favor, 0 opposed, and 1 abstention.
Thank you. Ways and Means.
Hello. Ways and Means voted to support this 1201. It resolves a 3-year-old contract, and I think John Petrin will supply the details.
Mr. Petrin.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So this is the police command contract. It's a 3-year deal. We're actually in the 3rd year of the deal. As you may remember, we talked about police patrol at the last town meeting, I believe, and that was an arbitrated contract. This was a mediated contract on the same conditions. So we basically took the same conditions as the patrol through mediation so that we didn't have to go arbitration and spend all the money. And so it's 2.5% each of 3 years, along with approximately 2% in there for adjustments within steps within there based on what the patrol had received. So the differentiation between what a patrol officer makes and a sergeant makes, same as it was. The difference between a sergeant and a lieutenant and captain all remain the same going through.
Thank you, Mr. Petrin. Questions? Mr. Glantz.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Noel Glantz, Precinct 1. 2 quick questions. What's the balance in that account? And what other, the negotiated settlements account that is, and what others are left besides the one that we took off the next article?
I don't have, unless someone has a balance for me. What's that? Altogether, $940,000 left in that account, and left is the fire department. The last contract we have left is the fire department, which is in its 2nd year out at this point. All other contracts have been negotiated and funded through this account.
Additional questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Article 4 has been withdrawn. Article 5 has been moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee to see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash to the Water Stabilization Fund the sum of $69,384 to be placed in the Water Stabilization Fund or to act in any other manner in relation thereto. Mr. Morandi.
Thank you. Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 in favor of this article.
Thank you. Ways and Means. Mr. Riggs.
Voted unanimously, 13-0-0 in favor. This is the sort of first occurrence of what will be a recurring transfer from monies raised through the water bills and headed for supporting the expansion of the water system through the MWRA. And last September, I think we approved the creation of this stabilization fund to support the expansion. Thank you.
Further questions on this? Mr. Glantz.
Thank you, Nolan Glantz, Precinct 1. What's the financial goal for this account and the timetable? Because it seems to me like it's a large item we're trying to tackle, and 69,000 seems like a tiny drop in the bucket. So why are we starting so low?
Mr. Sagarino. Keep talking. Try again.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. We'll actually be putting funds in and taking funds out on a regular basis. So this is something that we're going to have to get used to through the finalization of this project. And this is the first allotment of money that was collected specifically to help pay for the MWRA project. We will be using a portion of that to offset additional costs in the water department in the upcoming budget in May. So it's going to go in every year and go out. And the reason why we have to do it this way is because the cash flows on the project are pretty uneven. So we have to collect a little bit of more money in advance to smooth out some of the larger expenditures when we get down to phase 2 of the project.
Additional questions? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Brings us to Article 6. It has been moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee to see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash to the reserve fund, budget line item 92, the sum of $219,640 to be placed in the town's FY 2019 reserve fund or to act in any other manner in relation thereto. Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The Board of Selectmen on this particular matter voted 5-0 in favor.
Thank you. Ways and Means, Mr. Riggs.
Ways and Means voted to support this. The sum total of $200,019,640 was actually made up of 2 transfers that were made out of the reserve fund this past year. One was to fund an unexpected intercom system for the new fire station, or for the old fire system that was compatible with the new fire station. And the other was for transitional costs associated with the new town accountant and town administrator.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Questions? Mr. Martin.
Just a point of order, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. Scott Martin, Precinct 7. Could you ask Mr. Riggs to hold the microphone closer to his mouth so that we can hear him? Thank you.
I think you just did. Questions on the article? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Was there a question I missed? Sorry, motion carries. Let's move on. Article 7. Transfer from free cash to stabilization fund. Is moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee to see if the town will vote to transfer from free cash the sum of $700,000 to be placed in the stabilization fund or to act in any other manner in relation thereto. Mr. Tigas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Board of Selectmen voted 5-0-0 on this article.
Mr. Riggs, Ways and Means.
All right. So Ways and Means voted to support this transfer of $700,000 to the stabilization fund. This basically, since free cash was certified $11.9 million in the fall by the state, this replenishes the stabilization fund amount that was used to settle the school financial overrun in September town meeting. The vote was 13-0-0.
Questions on this? Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Roger Bell, Precinct 6. Mr. Petrin, just for the benefit of any new members here who may not understand each of those funds, if you could just elaborate a little so we understand the difference between the two and why they're utilized the way they are.
Mr. Petrin.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The stabilization fund is basically the savings fund of the town, in essence, and so we try to keep that to a level that we feel is sufficient to take care of future emergencies of the town and to keep the town having a reasonable savings, if anything were to go wrong. So we discuss this every year, particularly with Ways and Means Administration, have a very long discussion with Town Hall 1. There's always a whole meeting just on that piece. And so we felt that the number, that's being proposed to be over $8 million was a good place for the town of Burlington to be with an approximate budget of $140 million. That's a good place to be for a stabilization fund, so that if something were to go wrong, we have that capacity. The reserve fund, just as a note, is an in-house operating budget. So the Ways and Means has control of funds during the year. That can be done so we don't have to call a town meeting if something were to occur for a minor amount. So they get up to $300,000 typically to utilize if something were to happen during the budget year, so we're not always calling town meetings. And the last item, free cash, is, as we always say, it's not free and it's not cash. But it is basically the end of the year account. When we settle all our accounts at the end of a fiscal year, that is the money that's unaccounted for or remaining. Hopefully it's in a positive number. It can be negative, but hopefully it's positive, and we've been very fortunate for the last many years to have a very good free cash. And that we take a look at, and typically what we use free cash for is maintaining a good balance, number one. Number two, we look at it for our capital approach. So the one thing you never want to use it for is typically operating funds, but you do use it to reset your savings account, the stabilization, and you look at it to make sure you have the capacity to do your capital projects that you have moving forward.
Any further questions on this? Seeing none, we'll put it to a vote. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Brings us to Article 8. Alteration of Public Way, Mooney Road. This article has been moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee, and it is as printed in the warrant. Mr. Hartling, Board of Selectmen.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. 5-0 in favor.
Ms. Kastner.
Thank you. Give me just a second to... Thank you. I have a whole bunch of illustrations for you of this matter. But essentially, this is a long overdue housekeeping amendment that we, the town, I'll give you the story. Mooney Road. Where is Mooney Road? Mooney Road is between Peach Orchard and Marshall Simons Middle School, off Maple, Oak, Birch. Mooney Road, as laid out in paper, goes all the way up to Peach Orchard Road. However, only built to where you see the curve to Mooney Circle exists right now. As you can see, Peach Orchard Road all the way to your left, Mooney Road all the way down. This conversation came up. The number 1 lot that you see here, which is the address 0 Mooney Road, came before the planning board came to the building department. We said they didn't have frontage on Mooney Road because it was the paper street portion, so they came in for a subdivision. Through that process, we realized many, many things of history. So that was the original. The original was 1954. 1957, filed in 1958, Mooney Circle was created. And there was the jog in Mooney Road that was created at that time in 58. So what we have, just highlight the jog. So let me go to the next one quickly. So, do I have, oh, sorry, I don't have the full plan. So, Mooney Circle jog. This plan, which shows on your right, I know it's inverse, but it was just to show the relationship between this. Thank you. So, there we go. This house. This house is 0 Mooney Road. Came before us. This lot here was filed at the registry in 2006. This plan was endorsed by the planning board showing this, but it was filed, but never transferred the deed correctly to allow for this piece. So a lot of paperwork, but not a lot of filing that was done. This was a lot of filing done, but not actually a planning board process. Sorry, I'm trying to get this tiny pointer. So this came in front of us. We said, hey, that's funny. How'd that happen? Because we show the public way along this. This house here, built kind of presuming that they owned this. As you can see, the house is actually in the right of way. This, let me go to the next slide. So, like a real laser pointer? Ooh. Whoa, there we go. Okay, so Mooney Road, public way. This line here, accepted way, Mooney to Mooney Circle. We accepted as part of a larger list of legislation in 2007, I think. This side here, private way. So all of this came to our attention. The longest subdivision process, I think, for one lot we've planning board's gone through. But anyway, this all came to our attention. This had been incorrectly laid out, incorrectly registered, all of the above. So what we had figured out as this process is what is it supposed to be and how do we make it happen? So this is the private way, this is the public way. This box in yellow, it's not actually a box, it's the curve, but it's hard to draw. As you can see, my drawing skills on the other loop. But this part here in the yellow, this piece, should be within this lot. This little tail that's in the green would go to this lot. That is what this article is all about. It's asking you to convey from the public way correctly over time, this to this, and so lot Y to lot A, and lot, I think this is Z, to lot B. But so that's what it's all about. Any questions? I'm happy to take them.
Questions from the body? Seeing none, we'll put this to a vote. This is a 2/3. Oops, there's a question. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Martha Simon, not on town meeting, precinct 3. I looked at this really carefully and I don't understand it. So my question maybe was obvious to other people. But in looking at the map, are these easements that are public easements that allow people to walk through to the Marshall Simons Middle School? Is there any connection with these lots and the Marshall Simons Middle School that allow, for example, children to walk from that neighborhood to the Marshall Simons School?
So, sorry. The pathway that I think currently exists is here.
Okay.
We're talking about the lots right up here.
Okay, so there isn't a connection with these lots and any public easement to the Marshall Simons?
There is not.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Seeing none, we'll put this to a vote. All those in favor? All those opposed? It's a unanimous vote, so I don't have to make you stand up. The motion passes. Article 9, regulation of retail checkout bags. It has been moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee, and the article is as printed in the warrant. But I believe there is an amendment. Mr. Tigas.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Adam Tigas, Precinct 6, Chair of Bylaw Review. To discuss what the amendment is, in the section where it describes the thickness of each bag, in the description of 3 millimeters or thicker or greater than 3 millimeters, also you can include equal to or greater than to account for the situation that a bag might be exactly 3 millimeters thick. Thank you.
And there's also capitalizing B in bylaw.
Oh, yeah. And in our way to kind of make uniform our bylaws, we also asked them to capitalize the word bylaw as it is capitalized throughout the rest of the text. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tigas. So let's have a vote on the amendment, and then we can discuss the main motion. All those in favor? Mayor, a question? Yes, Mr. Boschel.
I may have just not heard that correctly. It's like the amendment is for 3 mils, not 3 millimeters, because I thought you said 3 millimeters. It's for 3 mils,
3
right?
mils. It's
All right.
actually just
3
adding-
millimeters would be fairly hefty bags.
Yes,
so
it would.
just want to make sure that we're not mandating 3 millimeters, but 3 mils.
3
All right.
mils.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's vote on the amendment. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, the amendment is passed. Mr. Tigas, does the Bylaw Review Committee have a recommendation? Or
Thank you for that catch, by the way. So the bylaw review actually has 2 votes on this. We are reporting the votes that we took when this initially came before town meeting at the last session, because the edits are only style edits and minor edits and not actual substantial edits to the intent of the bylaw. And so the first vote was 3-0 in favor of the article as it is with the amendments, saying that if it's passed, it will complete its objective. And then there was a second vote of 0 in favor, 3 opposed to the actual passage of the bylaw. I myself was not present at the meeting, but to relay some of the concerns, the people of the committee who were in attendance didn't necessarily feel that the alternatives of paper bags or reusable bags would necessarily be more environmentally sustainable or friendly. And essentially people were unsure of whether or not doing this at the town level versus the state level was the best route. And then there was also the concern of do our reusable bags actually get into the environment, considering the way that the town disposes of its waste with the incinerator. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tigas. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Do we have a presentation? All right. Hi, I'm Ricky Vidum.
And hello again to all of you. I certainly do remember a lot of you from September town meeting. I have seen a lot of familiar faces from the recent months, especially a lot of you. And I really do hope you remember us, because we got a lot of information to present tonight, and we hope that we can address any of your concerns.
Oh, yeah. First, we'd like to give a quick thank you to a couple people, Ms. Graham, Ms. Diozzi, Ms. Simon, Mr. Cohen, Laura Vidum, and anyone I didn't mention but has helped us out. Thank you. We really appreciate this.
And so, hello again, town meeting members. Today we're here to talk about the Burlington bylaw to reduce plastic litter in our town and to promote the use of reusables. by every single Burlington citizen in our town. And I know it's at the top of your mind right now. You're probably wondering, Article 9, what's it really all about? Well, Article 9 is the regulation of retail checkout bags bylaw. And in the presentation, we'll be covering how every single Burlington resident has an environmental duty. We'll talk about how our town deals with our waste. We'll go into how, if we continue to use our plastic bags the way we do right now, where that's going to lead us environmentally. Furthermore, we'll go into detail on a lot of the studies on the harmful effects of plastic waste, and we'll speak on what alternatives there are to plastic bags. Majorly, why reusable bags are the best option. And we will urgently ask you to vote in favor for Article 9, because it's not going to only be beneficial to businesses, but to every single resident living in the town of Burlington. Now, we were here last September. We heard a lot of your concerns and questions, and with this presentation, I hope that we'll be able to address and answer a lot of these concerns and questions that came up from last town meeting and the months preceding this one. Now, every single Burlington resident has a citizenship, but it's not to ourselves, our family, or our community, or even our country. Rather, this citizenship is to the entire world population. That is because we all have an environmental citizenship. Burlington residents need to be agents of change. We need to bring forth an environmentally sustainable future, not only for ourselves and our current generation, but for future generations to follow us. This means we must act now. And now Ricky will continue.
All right, so our town does have a method of dealing with this plastic waste. What they do. So the plastic waste does go into incinerators, but not all. From anecdotal evidence, the Conservation Commission has told us personally that they frequently see plastic bags in our environment. Right here are some examples. In Burlington, these plastic bags are everywhere. This is a reservoir, AMC up there. This is a cool pointer. They're everywhere in Burlington. You can go outside and probably see one right now. So about 100 billion bags are used in the US annually. And using a constant in Burlington, there are about 13 million used. That's a whopping amount. So most are discarded after one use. The average time used is about 12 minutes, and every time someone would go shopping and uses a plastic bag, about 15 are used per trip. The EPA themselves has viewed plastic bags as a hazard for wildlife, which is a major concern. Now, it has been reported that only about 1% of these single-use plastic bags are properly recycled, and in Massachusetts, it's not possible. The machinery that we send our recyclables to, called the MRF, it cannot process plastic bags, and instead they get stuck in these machines. So what workers have to do is they have to go in by hand and clean out these bags. So this is dangerous for the workers. It's costing money. It's wasting time. It's not efficient. And some people can say, well, why don't we just put in new machines? Well, because it's going to be millions, if not billions of dollars to install these. So
where does our continued use of these plastic bags going to lead us environmentally? Well, if we continue to use all of these 13 million plastic bags a year, they're going to pose a major threat to not only animal, but to human health. Plastic bags are going to break down into microplastics through a process of photodegradation. And these microparticles will find their way into our water and flow into our streams and ultimately end up in our ocean. Studies have been done for microplastics in the ocean, and a result of these studies is that they have found there are more than 15 trillion microparticles in the ocean currently. That number is still rising. And even a fraction of this gargantuan amount is an extremely significant amount of microplastics. And these plastic particles are being ingested by fish and ultimately humans. And honestly, when I started this, I wondered, how do we, as an inland community, affect the ocean? We're not next to the coast directly, but the fact remains that we have brooks and streams which flow our plastic bags and microplastics and lead out into the ocean. For example, Vine Brook in Burlington will flow into the Shawshene River and ultimately flow out into the Atlantic from Newburyport. And these are going to pose a humongous threat to animal and human health. Now, microplastics aren't the only harmful thing that comes from a plastic bag. Studies have been done on the harmful effects of plastic bags and their waste. I understand that Burlington's waste goes to an incinerator. What I am not suggesting is that we break our contract with incinerators. Instead, I'm hoping to allow you to understand that it is not a viable option to send our plastic waste to an incinerator. That's so because when plastics go into an incinerator, despite how they may boast of their emission controls and perfect pollutant control systems, there is always going to be human error. Specifically, Wheelabrator North Andover is an incinerator we resend our plastics to. And last year, 2018, they exceeded their allowed carbon monoxide emissions. That means they went over that amount and polluted excess carbon monoxide into the atmosphere. This is indicative of that when plastics are incinerated, they will release toxins and carcinogens into our atmosphere. Even further, incinerating plastics is not efficient. That's so because a report done by the company Eunomia states that 25% efficiency is the amount of energy produced by plastics when they're incinerated. That's not a good enough number. And to top it off, incineration is more expensive because it costs $20 more per ton rather than to be recycled. Now, we can continue on our trend to use plastic, and that can continue to harm our environment. But there are other kinds of bags out there. There are paper and reusable bags. But what's the best alternative to a plastic bag? I'll tell you, it's the reusable bag. Such as these and the ones where we have provided you, these are the most environmentally friendly option. And our bylaw is structured to promote these kinds of bags.
We need to act now. Countries all over the world have passed laws banning not only plastic bags, but plastic as well. Germany, Morocco, Israel, Ireland, Rwanda, which is considered a third world country, has banned all plastic and is considered one of the cleanest countries in the world. The EU, by 2021, will ban all plastics. Great Britain, by 2020, will ban all plastics. Indian states have full out banned all plastics, some even with 1.5% of the entire population contained in it. So it's not showing well right here, but these are the 90 towns and cities that have already passed or have proposed to pass a bylaw just like this. Surrounding towns just like us, Wakefield, Reading, Lexington, Watertown, Melrose, Andover, Bedford, all these surrounding towns have passed these, but not us yet. This is 40% of the Massachusetts population that have a bag bylaw under them. This article will benefit everyone, including citizens and business. So businesses, millions of dollars are spent buying plastic bags. If we can promote reusables and show that they can make a profit off it, it'll help reduce the cost and will allow them to save more money. Furthermore, some people are worried about the economic impacts of them. So we found a study by the Equinox Center and the company AECOM in Los Angeles and San Diego, and they determined that there was no sustained economic impact. Now, this could concern some people because this is California, not Massachusetts, very far away. So what we've done is we've called multiple retailers, small and large businesses from all these towns and cities, Melrose, Salem, Arlington, Somerville, Newtown, Framingham, and none of them have seen an impact on business that was negative. And then some people are also concerned that these businesses will be blindsided if this bylaw is passed. So what we've done is we have sent an email out to all retailers of Burlington to inform them of our bylaw and have given them as much information as possible. And we've also gone door to door to businesses, giving them information about this bylaw.
Now, what's going to be the effect on our town? Well, when this bylaw is passed, it will lead to a cleaner, greener, and brighter Burlington. Burlington itself is becoming a shopping haven in Massachusetts. These plastic bags, which are going to be littered, will ruin this aesthetic and ruin this pristine image. We need to conserve our lands and take an approach environmentally. We need to do something now, and we need to act on behalf of the 89% of Burlington residents who have already voiced their support for this bylaw. That's why we fervently urge you to vote yes for Article 9, the regulation of retail checkout bags bylaw. Thank you. We'd love to open the floor to
We'd like to open up the floor to discussion.
Yeah. Yes.
Thank you. Questions from the body on this? Mr. Eiler.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. John Eiler, Precinct 6. So I definitely love the idea of reducing plastic in the environment. I think it's, there's a lot of benefit to that. One of the concerns I had last time we spoke about this was what would be the actual effect of this proposed bylaw. So one of the things in the proponent's email was talking about data from Los Angeles and showing that their plastic bag ban, in fact, caused significant reduction not only in the plastic bag use, but paper bag use. Similarly, one of the things someone else sent around was talking about Alameda County, which also showed a significant reduce in all single-use bags. Now, the problem with both these studies is that those bylaws included 10-cent cost per paper bag. And in looking, one of the quotes from those studies, in fact, that was sent around, the exact quote was, "The 10 cents charge actually really affects how the consumer behaves at point of sale." And that, to me, is the biggest problem here with this bylaw. I believe that this ban will just cause people to switch from plastic single-use bags to paper single-use bags. If they want to use, it won't cause them to switch to reusable because they could use them now if they were going to. Simply giving them a different option of paper versus plastic will not cause them to say, of course I'll switch to reusable now. So what's the problem with switching to paper? All the studies I've read, including at the Sierra Club's own website, show that the carbon footprint of paper bags, even accounting for the fact that they're larger, is 4 to 5 times worse than for a plastic bag. So from a global warming point of view, this will cause the unintended consequence of significantly worse carbon footprint than what we have now. So I think what will end up happening, given the lack of a 10-cent charge on the paper bag, which I understand we can't do because we're a town and not a city, the unfortunate effect of this very well-intentioned bylaw is we'll be trading off the environmental problem of plastics in the litter stream to an even worse one of a significantly worse carbon footprint and all the effects of global warming that we've certainly all been reading about. So from that, because of that, I would have to encourage you not to vote for this. Thank you.
Mr. Conley.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tom Conley, Precinct 4.
I'd like to piggyback on what Mr. Eiler was saying a moment ago. I've been traveling. I have some elderly parents in Maine where a lot of these communities have similar bans on single-use plastic bags. And I was in Hannaford's in York this past weekend, and there they're charging 5 cents for a paper bag and $2.50 for a recycled bag. You would not believe the amount of paper bags that were going out that store, even at an extra charge. I was just like floored to see it just switching from plastic to paper, which, as John says, is a worse environmental impact. When I was up in Brunswick, which again has a similar single-use plastic bag ban, they did have reusable plastic bags for 10 cents. And they were a heavier material, and it seemed like, well, that's what we probably need. So I don't know why we're looking at single-use plastic bags as that's the enemy and let's not use them. I think what we need is a ban on single-use bags in general. So, you know, I hate to cut off our nose to spite our face by banning plastic bags when, as John says, we're just going to be using paper instead, which is worse. And I want to be clear that reusable cloth bags are 100 times worse for the carbon footprint than a plastic bag, but you get to reuse them. You know, there's all the pesticides and fertilizer and water and all of that to make up the cloth recycle bags. They're not a great play for the environment either, but at least they have a longer life. So can you explain why you haven't said single-use bags and you've said single-use plastic instead?
Well, I guess we could say it's a start towards banning single-use bags. In our opinion, we'd like to get rid of plastic bags first. We do think they do have an environmental impact, a big one as well. And while paper does have a substantial carbon footprint, I believe that there's still a carbon footprint for plastic as well. And if we can ban that, and if we can use the evidence we have from multiple towns, we have grocery stores saying that they've, like a Hannaford and Lowell, they say that they barely see people using reusable, they see people using reusable or no bags. There have been multiple Star Markets, Market Baskets, that have said they've seen people walk in, and these are Massachusetts ones, walk in with either no bags or reusable bags, or using a grocery box, like the ones where you carry in produce. And then there's small ones saying like 97% of their customers are supporting this legislation and are barely using paper bags, they're using reusables.
Yeah, well, I have anecdotal evidence to the contrary. I should have taken pictures so we can see all of the paper bags that are going out. I lost my train of thought, but I'm total, you know, I thought the way that we had left this the last town meeting with it was that it was going to a referendum, you know, so that all the citizens can speak. I just am totally against doing something that we think is going to be helpful. A lot of people I've heard say, well, this is the first step in the right direction. Well, the first step might be off the cliff. You know, you want to make careful steps, not a single step. You want to make sure you're going in the right direction, and I think this is in the wrong direction. Thank you.
Permission to address his concerns, Mr. Moderator?
Excuse me?
Permission to address his concerns?
Certainly.
I appreciate your concerns. I understand that you do have many questions about this ban, and I totally hear you. But what you mentioned was that the Hannafords in Maine had a $2.50 charge for reusable and only a 10-cent charge for paper. First of all, they're different than us because they have a charge for paper bags. And secondly, it is only logical that their bylaw may be flawed because they had paper bags cost less than reusable bags for their usage, because they had 10 cents compared to $2.50. That would mean that they need to use more than 2,500 paper bags to equal a cost, excuse my math if it was wrong, but sorry. They would have to use a pretty large amount of paper just to equate the cost of one reusable bag. One reusable bag. Yeah, but in Burlington, honestly, I do not think that we're going to be stepping off a cliff. What we're making is the first stepping stone to a greener Burlington, because we will be using reusable bags. Furthermore, paper is made from a renewable source. Plastic is made from a non-renewable source, non-renewable fossil fuels, crude oil. This is extremely harmful to the environment. It's a non-renewable source. Paper is a renewable source. But what we are saying, and based off of evidence, which is true, from statistics from other bag bans and from testimonials from customers and businesses alike, from the other 90 cities and towns in Massachusetts who have passed a bag ban, they have said that people are using their reusables. And it's a proven fact that reusables are a step into a greener effect, a greener world, a greener Burlington.
Mr. Bean.
Thank you. Mr. Wellsbean. Precinct 3. I think that there's been some confusion about whether there is a debate about the relative environmental impact of paper versus plastic, and whether some are, whether one is more environmentally friendly than the other. Now, there are definitely some contrarian news articles that are very clickbaity and have driven a lot of people to read them and share them. But the environmental community, the professionals who actually study these issues and advocate on them year in and year out, are pretty unanimous. The Sierra Club, Clean Water Action, Environmental League of Massachusetts, Conservation Law Foundation, Environment Massachusetts, UU Mass Action, Episcopalians Caring for Creation, MassPIRG, U.S. Humane Society, Mass Audubon Society, and others all support plastic bag bans here in Massachusetts. There's no debate. If you look at the entirety of the environmental impact of plastic bags, it is larger. If you look at one aspect of it, if you're looking at the greenhouse gas pollution, depending on how you count the numbers, paper might be higher. If you look at the renewability of the resource, if you look on the recyclability of the resource, if you look at the potential threats to wildlife from the different bags, if you look at all the different factors, there's a reason that every single environmental group lines up behind plastic bag bans, because it is the right thing to do. It is the more environmentally friendly thing to do.
Mr. Sinesi.
Adam Sinesi, Precinct 1. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So I saw a number up there that said 89% of the population of Burlington is in favor of this. That's a very impressive number, but I haven't heard from a single one of my constituents. So I have to ask, was there any sort of methodology that went into that polling? Is there anything that is, for example, weighted against the various precincts? Does it reflect the age demographics, the racial, the gender demographics of the town?
Yeah, it was done by a survey in April 2018. They didn't state what precinct they were from, but they were all Burlington residents coming here to see the play Pippin. It was April 2018, it wasn't that long ago, and that was when it was about to come on into May, and more than 100 people replied to that survey.
Was it done by a polling firm?
It was done by us, and we put inserts into the pamphlets for the play, and the people who did respond, their views were collected.
So it was probably weighted towards a lot of people that attend the high school.
Well, it was the people that we could get to. Burlington has a very large population, and we have tried to survey all the businesses, but we have been instead emailing information about how the effects will be to the businesses, and every single one of them has been informed.
So there's nothing scientific about the poll that was taken?
No, but that is a poll done on a few Burlington residents who did come and were there.
Thank you.
Mr. Boschelt.
Thank you very much, Chair Burchell, Precinct 4. Appreciate the energy behind this, and I think it's great to see young people actively caring about things. I do have to ask, are you familiar with the study by the Danish EPA, which was published in February 2018, on the life cycle for shopping bags?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I wasn't able to hear the study.
Danish EPA published in February 2018, so just about a year ago, a fairly comprehensive 150-page study on the life cycle for shopping bags. Are you familiar with that one?
No, we're not familiar with that particular survey, but there have been life cycle analyses on plastic bags, and they have found that they will stay in the environment for pretty much forever.
Okay, sorry, it's like I just want to add a couple of comments to this. So it's like, I think the Danish EPA is probably above being a massive supporter of the oil industry or anybody else, but I think they had a couple of very interesting things that they found. So generally they found that LDPE bags, which are the ones that we're talking about, on the average have one of the best overall impact to the environment overall. And they've been looking to many more impact categories than just climate change. They've been looking at ozone depletion, they've been looking at acidification, terrestrial as well as salt water. It's like about 15 impact categories that we're looking at. They found that cotton or cotton-based products require about 20,000 reuses on the average in order to be able to meet up to the same level of environmental impact that a single plastic bag has. I doubt that people are reusing cotton bags 20,000 times. The PET bag that you have there in front of you would have to be reused 100 times in order to get to the similar or same level as a LDPE bag. So I doubt that we're going to be seeing a lot more than 100 or 150 uses of that. I think it's like I'm really going with what John and Tom were saying. It's like I think the belief that plastic seems to be bad is something that is understandable. I think there are other alternatives to that, such as highly biodegradable plastic bags that are also made out of thin film that can definitely address some of those things. But I think it's like a base ban on LDPE bags without further studies, just because everybody else is doing, is probably not a good idea.
I would also like to say that the Danish EPA conducted that survey, but the United States EPA, our environmental protection agency, has gone on record multiple times and have fervently voiced their support for plastic bag bans. They have viewed plastic single-use bags as a detrimental thing to our environment. And you mentioned that these studies were talking about other, maybe more better effects from plastic bags. But the fact remains is that it's not a myth that plastic bags are being degraded into microplastics, which are harmful to animal populations and to us, because almost every single fish by 2025 will have a microplastic in it. That's a fact, because these plastics are still degrading.
Sorry, just to reply to that. So I think the overall impact of the plastic bags from the US to microplastics in the oceans is somewhat debatable. So I'd love to see some clearer studies with regards to what actually came out of that, and I think that would be one of the interesting things. The other thing is like that plastic bags are non-reusable or non-renewable resources, while paper bags are. May be true, but at the same time, please take into consideration that it takes a lot more gasoline in order to get the much heavier plastic bags into our stores versus the much lighter plastic bags that we use in the form of LDPE. So again, it's like I'm really not convinced that this is all the right thing to do.
Mr. Monaco.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm not going to move the question. Sorry, folks. You can debate the science on this for a long time, And it's probably true that the simple alternative of paper versus a single-use plastic has a worse carbon footprint. But I also think it's true that the carbon footprint relative to this particular thing is totally irrelevant, because the carbon footprint both in New England and around the globe is affected by enormously, it's swamped by things like automobiles, power generation and other things. I think the real point, and I was not particularly in favor of this for the longest time, but I've been thinking about it, and first of all, I've had phone calls in favor of this, and we've seen emails in favor of it. So thinking about just representing your constituents, I think there is some support for this in the community. I also think the point that these gentlemen made, which several of us have been talking about, is single-use anything, it's become a way of life in developed countries. So we sort of get things, use them, and throw them out and go buy another one. And for a lot of applications, it's not particularly good because it chews up resources and it becomes wasteful. So I think in order to get out of this problem, you really have to get away from single-use packaging or carrying of your goods, and this is a place to start. It'll do nothing for the carbon footprint, but it goes in a direction that starts to get everybody, the science, the materials that are used, the cultures, the habits of people, and I see no reason, honestly, not to do this, even though it's going to be terribly inconvenient for a lot of us, because these lightweight, easy to get rid of plastic bags are enormously convenient. But multiple use containers are readily available, they work, you can wash them, and I tend to think it's a step in the right direction, which is really what they're saying. You got to start somewhere. And I think arguing the science is actually pointless at this point, and I am going to vote in favor of it. Thank you.
Ms. Nash.
Mildred Nash, Precinct 3. Tom, I think, is one of my favorite people, and I know he recycles a lot of things, but on this, I have sort of a story that goes along with Mr. Monaco, who so often speaks wisdom to us. And this is... But to give my own anecdotal comparison, and this goes back a long way when IGA was in Burlington, so anybody under 60 has no idea what I'm talking about. But the year before we lived in Burlington, we lived in London, and we were staying with a woman who lived all alone. And when the three of us, because I only had one kid at the time, moved in, she said, "Now, I pay for one trash bag a week." And she showed me, and it was about the size of a paper bag. I can't remember what it was made of. And she said, "So you're living with me, so we all share this bag." And I just looked at her like, how can this work? Well, it turns out she gave me a cloth bag, and when you went shopping, you simply put your things in the bag, and in fact, it worked. So I got back to this country, got my first bicycle, and I would bike up to IGA, and I would get my groceries, and I'd think, I can't get them home in the bike basket, so I would take all the packaging and stuff it in the waste basket at the IGA, and then fit the groceries without the packaging in my bike and bike home. Now, this brings up what Frank had said, makes it impossible. If we're going to talk about, oh my God, we have a problem that's insurmountable, and there's no point in even starting until some genius comes along and finds a use for this, as I hear some young man from China is doing with all this stuff in the Pacific Ocean. He's finding a way to get it to shore and convert it to something, and he'll make $1 million someday. But until that happens, this isn't going to make a huge difference, but I do see more and more people going to the store with cloth bags, and I do think that it's those small steps that we begin to say, wait a second, do we have to package everything? I think it was Mrs. Warfield who said it's the Tylenol scare, that ever since somebody tampered with the Tylenol way of packaging, that you have to have practically a mechanical engineering degree to get anything open these days. I think it's a good place to start. And I have to say, I do admire these students because they have almost as much hesitation about giving up on an issue they believe in as I do. I kind of like that. Thank you.
Mr. Priest.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Nick Priest, Precinct 6. First off, gentlemen, commendable as always. I think if nothing else, you two have proven persistency in a belief that you carry with you, and if nothing else, congratulations for that. And I hope that you don't lose it. Regardless of what comes to this body tonight, you guys have done a fantastic job, and you fought a fantastic case. I honestly side with Mr. Monaco and Mrs. Nash. To be quite frank, I think that we can argue the points till the cows come home. And this is Burlington, we don't farm anymore, so there are no cows. So we could be here for a while. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that instead of poking holes in this, we can use it as a foundation block. We can grow and build from it. I was speaking to some folks a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned the rain barrel program that the town did. And someone said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, geez, the town offered prorated rain barrels. You can get a rain barrel. It's great. I have one." Well, I didn't know about that. Education is going to be a huge part of this. Getting people to understand and to shift the way they operate in this world is not an easy thing. Of course it's not easy. Why would I want to stop using a single-use bag? It's super convenient, right? I must have bought 5 reusable bags to start. I didn't touch them for a year. They sat in a corner of my house. And then my wife put them in the car. And then a year later, I started, it took me 2 years. Me personally, 2 years to start using reusable bags. It's not easy. And we can joke about, all the problems, and we can laugh about it, and we can, again, poke holes in everything. Or we can take a turn, and we can stand with these 2 fine young men, and we can find a way to make it work. And we can move from just the plastic bags to something else. Maybe it's all single-use bags. Maybe we work at a bigger level to get rid of plastic bottles or straws or whatever it is, right? But instead of just knocking them down, maybe we stand with them. We figure it out, one step at a time. It's not over a cliff, Tom. It's just plastic bags. Something tells me that we will somehow survive. So I'm voting in favor. I hope you do too. Thank you.
Mr. Cohen. It's on, Larry.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As you all have by now, you should all have a copy of the Conservation Commission's, what they wrote on this subject. And I'm not going to read it to you because you've all had a copy. You may even have gotten it by email, so that's fine. But I was thinking about this myself, and I have some personal comments that weren't ratified by the commission that I wanted to offer you. And so it goes like this. It is true that paper bags use a renewable resource as opposed to plastic using a non-renewable resource, crude oil, and that 40% of paper bags are recycled paper. Life cycle studies that I've seen show that energy used in manufacturing is about the same as for plastic as for paper. And also that the production of greenhouse gases during combustion is higher for paper bags. Well, of course it's higher. I mean, paper bags have a lower caloric value. Plastic bags have a higher caloric value. On a per bag basis, yes, paper bags are going to have higher emissions. It's a much higher weight item. On a per pound or per gram or per ton basis, then you're going to get far more emissions based on that simple fact from plastic. Now, however, plastic bags do not biodegrade, but do break down into small pieces from ultraviolet radiation. These microplastics can migrate through wind and currents. A large body of evidence in the peer-reviewed literature reveals that microparticles of plastic are in the human body and mammals are unhealthy. Microplastic particles have been found in fish, birds, and mussels. 85% of sea turtles will be injured or killed by plastics in their lifetime, including the endangered leatherback turtle that summer in Massachusetts Bay before migrating to the tropics to mate. Sea turtles photographed eating plastic bags have become the poster child of the environmental harm from plastic bags. Now, my concern, in addition to all these things, is that the major concern with plastics in the human body is that plastics leach synthetic estrogens that detrimentally affect human health. You've probably had cereal bottled up in a plastic container for a long period of time, and then when you open up that plastic container and you smell it, it doesn't smell right. It has a chemical taste, chemical smell. Those are the chemicals that have leached from the plastic into the food that you possibly could consume, but usually you throw it out because it doesn't smell right, okay? Plastics in water therefore pose a direct environmental impact, and they also pose a huge indirect public health risk. The most major, a peer-reviewed study that was published in Scientific American this past April found plastic particles and microfibers in packaged sea salt, beer, bottled water, and tap water. This makes it virtually certain that we are ingesting microplastics. The adverse effects of plastic bags on the biosphere are enormous and are recognized worldwide, so much so that many other countries have already addressed their use. Even though the comparison of paper versus plastics, considering natural resources, is really a mixed picture. When the potential for harm to human health is factored into consideration, it seems obvious that single-use plastic bags should be banned. The key to reducing environmental impacts of any plastic bag is to reuse it as many times as possible. Therefore, a reusable bag provides the most benefit to our environment. You know, I felt for these reasons that we needed to start somewhere in dealing with this problem. I personally recommend that we ban plastic bags. Thank you very much.
Ms. Shakabe.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. First of all, thank you, boys, for being so passionate about this issue. I think we've been debating this over a year now, and it's high time we make a decision on it. All of us have had enough time to research on it, and I'm sure by now we've all made our decisions. I agree with Mr. Priest that we have to start somewhere, and this is the right step in the right direction. There's a lot of reuse. Paper bags can be used in compost, if you guys don't know, but plastics can't. So there are a lot of things that we can do with paper bags and not with plastics. If this is the first step, just banning the paper bags, maybe we need to start charging for the paper bags later on, and so that people will then start using reusable bags. It is really too much of an inconvenience. I love the reusable, the plastic bags, but just to be environmentally friendly, when the rest of the world is looking at it like that, there are so many communities in Massachusetts. Boston just went. So I don't understand why we are clinging on to these plastic bags. I really fail to understand. I really encourage all of you to think about it really hard and just do the right thing by your community and by the environment. Thank you.
Mr. Patterson.
Is this working? Yes, it is. Monty Pearson, Precinct 3. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I think that the folks who are arguing that we will, by banning plastic bags, just encourage people to go and use paper bags, are using kind of a billiard ball kind of logic, that people are kind of cheap cost-seeking people who don't really think about the environment other than cost things. And I would argue that what would happen is that by town meeting taking a step that will be publicized and that you'll see in signs around in the town and stuff, saying that plastic bags are bad and that you do have the option of a paper bag if you really insist, but instead you also could use a reusable bag, and what you have to do is look at the grocery stores and say, how many people are already using reusable bags, even though there's no, they're tiny little plastic bags all available for them. And at lots of grocery stores, even though there's no financial reason for them to do that, there's no regulation for them to do that, people are carrying more and more bags. And the next step in that process is taking away one of the things that we know is a hazard for the environment. And yeah, we're not taking away the paper bags from people, but I don't think that that makes sense for us to force people to use reusable bags. But by telling them that this is a concern that they need to think about, we'll really encourage a lot of people to use reusable bags. I use them all the time, and it really isn't that big of a deal. You know, once you get used to it, it's just a little bag that you carry with you. It's not really that hard. And I think that we need to take these kind of steps and other steps because, you know, our planet is in a little bit of danger now. You know, in November, a town the size of Burlington burned down in California because of the drought. And
Mr. Pearson, let's get back to the issue we have in front of us.
Well, I don't want to have a town, I don't like having a town the size of Burlington burning down. And I think that that is the kind of thing, that is the kind of environmental impact that we're going to start seeing more and more in the United States. And just doing some things like this, a small thing like this, shouldn't be that hard of a thing. We're going to have a lot of much bigger changes to make in the future.
Mr. Giannino.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Gary Giannino, Precinct 1. I'd like to move the question.
The question has been moved. It's not debatable. All those in favor of moving the question? All those opposed? Motion is passed. Now we move on to the main motion. I need 7 people. We don't have 7 people. All those in favor? We're voting on the main motion. All those in favor of the motion? There weren't 7 people standing when I called the question. I'm sorry. So I already called the question. All those in favor of the motion, please. If you want to call for a roll call, you can do it after this. No, we're voting on the main motion. We already moved the question. Okay? All those in favor of the motion? All those opposed? Let's do a count.
You have to have 7 people stand for a roll call.
What's the... Okay, there are now 7 people standing. Thank you. 3 people didn't make it before. Okay. Give me a list. Okay. Okay, now, we are voting on the main motion. Everybody's got that? Article, what is this, 9? Article 9, main motion. Roll call vote. William Boyven. Brad Bond. Gary Giannino. Nolan Glantz. Mike Cardy. Sandra Madigan. Pat Moreno. Bruce Morey. Greg Ryan. Maureen Ryan. Jennifer Scanlon. Robert Sears. Adam Sinesi. David Wadilla. Catherine Beyer. Doug Davison. Ed Dubé. Angela Hannafin. Daniel Hannafin. Susan Harrigan. Amanda Laskowski. Patricia O'Brien. Eleanor O'Connell. Cynthia Phillips. Jean Rossi. Miranda Saltman. Kimberly Trainer. Laura Vittum. Sean Connors. Lucy Damiani. Lucy was yes? Thank you. Sherry Ellis. James Frost. Stephen Marchese. Gary Mercier. Stephen Moran. Mildred Nash. Julianne Ouellette. James Patterson. Monty Pearson. Roger Riggs. Andrew Wells Bean. Gerald Bouchel. Craig Callahan. Oops, excuse me. Tom Conley. Karen Cooper. Erin Ellis. Mark Gerbrands. Joan Hastings. David Miller. Frank Monaco. Laura Nichols. Michael Prue. Eileen Sickler. Stephen Stam. Christine Warren. Sally Willard. Chiffon Wong. Stephen Worsham. Tamara Moniscato. Did I get that right, Tamara? Is she here still? Nope, she left. All right. Pat Angelo. Albert Fay. Lawrence Gelberg. Adrian Gerbrands. Paul Gerard. Chris Murphy. Kelly Pappas. Michelle Prendergast. David Tate. Richard Wing. Ernest Zabolotny. Roger Bell. Diane Creedon. Sean Curtin. Daniel R. DiTucci. Daniel DiTucci Jr. Oops, not here, never mind. John Eiler. Gary Caskey. Rose Manny. Edward Parsons. David Peterson. Nicholas Priest. Sonia Rollins. Sylvana Shakabe. Michael Souza. Adam Tigas. Jorge Andrade. Elliot Brown. Cody Case. Ann Cody. Brenda Haney. Betsy Hughes. Kevin Keene. Miriam Kelly. Scott Martin. Maria O'Connor. Michelle Papano. Eric Parker. Jonathan Sachs. Lois Smith Martin. Tammy Vallis. Never mind. David Van Camp. David Webb. Mark Wood. All right. Mr. Noonan, what precinct? 3. All right. Paul, could you please come up and sign in? That's why we didn't call you. Okay, there were 52 in favor, 45 opposed. The motion passes. Yes, sir.
Meeting member for addressing their concerns. We really heard all of them, and I'm extremely happy that this is passed.
What? Yes. Who's the point of order? Mr. Frost? No, it is not. For zoning it is, but not for regular bylaw. Okay. One more, Article 9, Article 10. Article 10 has been moved and seconded by the Ways and Means Committee to amend Article 2, Representative Town Meeting of the General Bylaws as printed in the warrant. Come on, let's get called to order. Let's go. Please sit down. If you have to talk, move outside. We've got one more article to kill, and then we can all go home. Mr. Tigas, Bylaw Review Committee.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Moderator. So just some general information about this bylaw. This was also the second bylaw that was postponed at the last town meeting. Essentially, just so you know the origin of why the general bylaw review took it up, some votes, like we have had a lot of examples just tonight, require a 2/3 vote. And there are some instances where the 2/3 is fairly obvious. And we have, a declaration of 2/3, we move on to the next item. But we've also run into the situation that when we do that, we don't always take a count, an official count, and we've had questions about whether or not there was a 2/3 on certain things. We've gotten lucky on some cases where, the camera broadcasting this from BCAT is focused on the town meeting members at the time the vote's taken. But it's kind of risky to not have some way to have the 2/3 allowed to be called without a hand vote every single time. And this allows the moderator to do such when they feel it is evident. And based off of some of the concerns that we heard last time about necessarily trying to rush through votes, we kind of tweaked the language a little bit about how it can be objected to, which is essentially now the same way that you would do a roll call vote, which you also just saw tonight too. So you have to have someone stand, object, and then we would begin the process of an actual hand count if people thought that the moderator made a misjudgment in counting the 2/3. This not only helps us speed up our own process, but it also helps protect the integrity of the votes that town meeting takes, because if we get caught in the situation where we kind of speed through a 2/3 vote without having it on the books that the moderator can call as such, without always having a hand count, then you can kind of wonder what the Attorney General is going to say if we can't produce the actual count. So if there's any questions, I'm more than happy.
Questions? Ms. Willard?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Sally Willard, Precinct 4. As someone who's looked out into this audience and tried to determine whether it was 2/3 or not, I support this. I think that this is an excellent idea.
Thank
you. Mr. Conley?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tom Conley, Precinct 4. Should the moderator be presiding over this?
I'm not voicing an opinion, Tom.
I'm just asking.
It's not for me in particular, so no, I can do this. Vote of bylaw review, Adam?
I'm sorry. Hello. Hello. All right. At the meeting that we voted on this, it was a 4-0 in favor. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll move the question. All those in favor? All those opposed? It's clearly a 2/3.
Thank you.
The motion passes. Motion to adjourn. Did I hear a motion to adjourn? All in favor? Opposed? We're done.